Hi, I'm Breach Titan. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I noticed that there's not a lot of content surrounding the Valakut archetype in terms of gameplay videos, real analysis, stuff like that. There's some out there, but not nearly enough. And I wanted to create a channel that's dedicated to the Valakut deck, in particular the Through the Breach variant. No scape shifts in the 75. Sometimes they'll be there, sometimes they won't be. I suppose this list is going to evolve over many matches and games, but I am in love with this deck. I own this deck in paper and, of course, here on MTGO, where I will be having, I'll be playing all of my games for you guys. And I wanted to show, basically, I want to kind of start a conversation. I want to start a dialogue about this deck, get some more eyes on it. I think that it's a great deck in Modern. I think it's super well positioned, and it's a great deal of fun to play with. It's got great inevitability, and it's a combo deck, so it can do a little bit of everything. I don't know, I guess a little more about me. I live in upstate New York. I am a freelance artist in my, that's my day job, I guess. I love playing Magic. I've been playing since about cons. I remember, oh no, I guess Fate Reforged is when I really started playing Magic the Gathering. And I got into Modern, I think a couple of weeks after I started playing. I kind of immediately jumped into Modern, gravitated towards that format. I've played a lot of decks in Modern. I've played almost every deck. I love tier 1 stuff. I don't really build, but I do tweak, and I consider myself a pretty competitive player. I came to this deck about a year and a half ago. Played Scapeshift for a while, and my friend introduced me or put me onto the Through the Breach variant that ran from Evil Titan and Emrakul, the Aeon's Torn, and Summoner's Trap. Just a real fun, kind of wonky combo deck. But I did play it, I did love it, and eventually it led me to this, and I've been playing this ever since. I finally bought the deck online, made myself a Magic the Gathering online account, obviously, and I've been doing pretty well with this deck. So I wanted to start a YouTube channel, start making videos, gameplay analysis, really just get people talking about this deck, trade tips and tricks. I'm not a perfect player, but I'm pretty good, and I think that this deck definitely deserves a lot more attention than it has. It's kind of the secret weapon of the format right now, and I hope to demonstrate that through my gameplay videos. So every video, I guess from now on, every video will be or most of the videos that I make will be gameplay videos, obviously, of me, playing in leagues and whatnot. But since this is the first video that I'm making and that I'll be uploading to YouTube, I think it's only fair that I do a deck tech, talk about some of the choices. That's all this video is going to be, is just, an introduction and talk about my card choices and what I think is going on with the format right now. So, as of the time of this recording, Hogak and Faithless Looting have just been banned in Modern. I'm recording this on August 28th. Stoneforge Mystic has been unbanned. So pretty big deal, pretty wild update there. I think it's going to make for a lot of a slower format. Wizard says not minced words in stating that they want it to be less graveyard centric. They want there to be more plays to the battlefield decks, more fair decks to rise to the top, and they hope that getting rid of Hogak, which really had to go, that was an oppressive card, and Faithless Looting, which I don't think was necessarily an oppressive card. It actually used to be in this build before the ban, but they got rid of those, and I guess they hope that Stoneforge Mystic will facilitate and put fuel into some new, fresh ideas, and that Modern will become more of a format about, battlefield matters rather than graveyard matters. I agree with it. I think that it's a cool shakeup. It'll be interesting to see where it goes, but right now in all the leagues, everyone and their grandmother who owns Stoneforge Mystic is playing with Stoneforge Mystic, so lately I've been seeing a lot of those online. It'll probably die down as the cream of the crop kind of rises. We discover really what Stoneforge Mystic is going to do to the format. That being said, as I said before, I think this deck is very well positioned. It's got a great deal of good matchups, very few bad ones, It preys on fair decks with the snow-covered lands and the snow mechanic from the getting kind of a shot in the arm from Modern Horizons. There have been a great deal of snow decks, snow-based decks, 3-color and some 4-color decks, and I think that this deck preys on those. I think that this deck preys on Tron. The only decks that this deck kind of that are bad matchups, I guess, are quicker, non-interactive combo decks that don't really play to the field. And I think that there's going to be less of those in the near future. I guess that remains to be seen, but that's my analysis. And my experience has kind of bore that out so far, but as I said, we'll see. So okay, let's I guess with that aside, let's get to the actual deck tech here. Start talking about some cards. So this build runs 25 lands. I think that the difference between this deck and Scapeshift is, well, one of them is the number of lands. That's the biggest one, and of course Through the Breach and Simian Spirit Guide. But I think that what makes this deck better even than Scapeshift is the speed factor. I think even with, well, I guess without Hogak and Faithless Looting, the format, I guess it was their intention to slow down the format a little bit, but this deck is still blisteringly fast. Common hands, like top of the bell curve hands, will see you casting Through the Breach on turn 3 or turn 4 at the absolute latest. And if your opponent has taken any damage from their own fetch lands, shock lands, or if you even bolted them, or in some rare cases attack them with Sakura Tribe Elder, you pretty much just win on the spot. There are not, I don't think, any tier life gain decks in the format. Besides maybe Warza, if you count Thopter Sword as a life gain combo. That deck's powerful for its own reasons. I don't think it's really trying to gain life. It's just kind of a side effect of going infinite when it does have that combo out. But in any case, this deck is a lot faster than any Scapeshift variants. In that regard, it is favored against plain Valakut Scapeshift or Titan Shift builds. You're often going off on turn 3. You only need 4 mountains to go off, or a Valakut and 3 mountains, and you're 18ing your opponent on turn 3 or turn 4. You're kind of always in that realm there. So only 25 lands. As far as land choices go, Cinderglade and Basic Forest are kind of among the weakest lands. Valakut's weak because it comes in tapped. Obviously, it always has to come in tapped. Cinderglade because it mostly comes in tapped. And Forest is, I think, probably the weakest card in the deck. But it is an unfortunate necessity because under cards like Blood Moon, you really do need to be able to have 2 green sources to enable Primeval Titan, a great deal of the cards in your sideboard, and of course your ramp spells. So any hand that contains Forest is just that much weaker for it. I have often lost games to Forest being the land that was available to me as opposed to a mountain or a dual land, be it a shock land or a battle land. It just has to be there. I've never had less than 2 forests in my main. Normally I side one out if I do not anticipate Blood Moon will be an issue. If I do anticipate Blood Moon out of the board for my opponent, I normally side out 1 Valakut. But yeah, I think that this is a very healthy mana base. I've had great experience with it. Some lists run only 3 Cinderglades and more mountains, and the fetch lands can be a little bit different, but I found that this mix is optimal for me. Obviously, I don't think that it's perfect, but it's, I think, the best for this build of the deck. 1 Windswept Heath and 2 Bloodstained Mires that are kind of off-color fetch lands. Obviously, we have 4 Wooded Foothills that are fully on-color, can get any red or green source in the deck that we need it to, but 1 Windswept Heath just in case we do need to get a forest for whatever reason, and 2 Bloodstained Mires that can fetch just about anything else in the deck besides the basic forests. Summoner's Pact is a phenomenal card, great enabler. It basically serves as Primeval Titans 5 through 8, Woodfall Primus when you need it, and out of the board, Tireless Tracker, Obstinate Baloth, or Rurik Thar. Just a fantastic card. The sideboard is still still under construction. As I said, Stoneforge Mystic is all over the place right this moment because it was recently unbanned, but I anticipate that it will settle down as people kind of get used to it and learn how to play against it. And as the more perfect, more refined builds rise to the top of the meta. It's used to have Reclamation Sage, some Naya builds have Night of Autumn, other green creatures that can be targets for Summoner's Pact. It's a super useful card in that any green utility creature that you might want, I don't have that many in my 75 obviously, but nonetheless it is a fantastic card and it often is a game-winning top deck. As far as my 1-drop removal suite, I've got 1 Flame Slash, 3 Lightning Bolt. In my experience, Lightning Bolts have often not been enough to handle Urza. That's kind of a problem card that I have played against a number of times. Every game that I play against Wurza or Urza Thopter or whatever you want to call it has felt really close, closer than it should be, too close for comfort. I win some, they win some, but Flame Slash is often the difference if they happen to play Urza and then don't just win the game on the spot, because a lot of the time if they resolve Urza, that is often more than enough for them to just win the game on the spot, depending on what else is in their graveyard or what other events have transpired that game. Also takes care of Thing in the Ice. I don't think we'll be seeing too much more of that after Faithless Looting, but there are a number of cards that Flame Slash does just very neatly handle very efficiently. This used to be a roast. I used to have 2 roasts and 2 bolts in the main. This is kind of a flex slot. I think it can change depending on what we're expecting, who you're playing against, and basically the overall flavor of the meta. Besides Urza and Sai Master Thopterist, which both go in the same deck, obviously, there aren't very many X4 or 4 toughness creatures in the format that I worry about too much. It's kind of a nice other out to humans in case Lightning Bolt has been named, like a Meddling Mage and a Phantasmal Image, naming Anger of the Gods and Lightning Bolt kind of takes out your removal suite, besides, of course, Valakut itself. So Flame Slash is a great kind of card that is a little better than Bolt, a little slower than Bolt, but it hits harder, and it can often turn the tide in your favor or slow an opponent down significantly if they don't have it, if they don't expect it. Of course, you got your ramp spells, 4 Farseek, 4 Soccer Tri-Belder. I've always had 4 Soccer Tri-Belder, that number's never changed, but the number of Farseeks in the deck has definitely fluctuated a bit. I've heard arguments for Explorer, I've heard arguments for Wood Elves, Growth Spasm, Solemn Simulacrum in some cases. All pretty decent choices, but I think Farseek is just by far the most efficient mono ramp spell. It's a 2-drop. It always finds something. I just don't see any better replacement for it. I used to play with 3. I think the most common split that people talk about is 3 Farseek, 1 Explorer, or some split between Farseeks and Explorers. I used to play with 3 Farseek and 1 Explorer, or at least I tried it for a little while. I found decent success with, or decent results with Explorer, but at only 25 lands, I often am keeping a spell heavy hand with only 2 or 3 lands, and Explore really often does not allow me to play a second land. So for this initial build on this channel, I'm going to just do 4 Farseeks and we'll see how that goes. 4 Search for Tomorrows, obviously it's a 1-drop ramp spell that becomes relevant on turn 3, or that casts on turn 3, which is the most relevant turn for this deck, because between Search for Tomorrow and Simian Spirit Guide, or Search for Tomorrow and really any other ramp spell, you are through the breaching on turn 3, assuming you hit all your land drops, which with 25 lands ought to happen, or happens a great deal of the time, unexpectedly for the opponent. Cutting any number of these for sideboard, or any number of these for sideboard, is kind of dependent on the play or on the draw. Normally when I'm on the play, I will cut a number of Farseeks, depending on what else I have to bring in and what else I have to take out. And if I'm on the draw, I will cut any number of Search for Tomorrows, depending on what else is coming in or out. Simian Spirit Guide is, I think, the best enabler in this deck. I do not leave home with any less than 4 in my deck box, and I certainly never start a league with any less than 4 in my online list. It is just such powerful. It is so powerful to have free secret mana. It just often wins the game. It's often the card I'm hoping to draw when I'm in the middle of ramping and playing lands and casting spells. Often Simian Spirit Guide just carries me over the top, and it enables so many ways to make turn 3 breach that it's insane. Some people have made arguments for cutting 1 or even 2. I would shelve the deck before I cut even 1. This deck needs to have 4. As long as there's Through the Breach in this deck, there will be 4 Simian Spirit Guides. just a beautiful ramp spell, and it takes advantage of another one of traditional Titan Shift's weaknesses, which is that it does need a critical mass of lands to go off, whereas with Simian Spirit Guide you only need 4 red sources in play at the time that Through the Breach resolves. Sometimes even only 3. I've just to ramp up and get the damage engine going. When I've had an opportunity, I've had 3 red sources in play and used 2 Simian Spirit Guides to breach in a Titan. Often that's enough to get it started. It won't 18 them, but it often is more than enough to get a couple of Valakuts going, so that every land drop from then on, and just about every spell that you cast from then on does damage, which is fantastic. And I've often, against Tron particularly, there was a memorable game against Tron in which I was able to, on turn 3, with 3 land drops, no ramp spells, and 2 Simian Spirit Guides, Through the Breach in a Woodfall Primus, and just take the game away from them, leaving them with no lands and a 5/5 in their face, which is very, very often more than enough. So, Simian Spirit Guide, best card, never leave the house with less than 4. Anger of the Gods, of course, for creature decks. Humans can be a little tricky. I think Humans is definitely one of our trickier matchups. Between Lightning Bolt and Anger of the Gods, and they're meddling mages and Kitesail freebooters, we are often hoping on a Flame Slash or just to win with Primeval Titan. Meddling Mage is good for their removal, it's good for stopping our removal against them, but between Through the Breach and Primeval Titan, they often don't have enough to stop either the instant or the creature, or both the instant and the creature. So I have definitely often won through a Meddling Mage, naming Primeval Titan, thinking they got me, and then I cast Through the Breach, or a Meddling Mage naming Through the Breach, and then I just cast Primeval Titan naturally. So Anger of the Gods is there to help with small creature decks. Hardened Scales is making a bit of a resurgence. It gets around modular, it gets around death triggers, just a solid kind of sweeper of a card to buy you some time against those quicker aggro decks or weenies decks that like to get big and congregate. Fantastic card. I have 1 Sweltering Suns in the side as kind of a hedge against humans and other decks where it doesn't really matter if they go to the graveyard or are exiled. I just want to deal 3 to each creature, and so I'll bring this in if I'm expecting cards to be named that I can't cast. So 2 Anger of the Gods in the main, 1 Sweltering Suns in the side. It used to be Anger of the Gods, Sweltering Suns in the main, and 1 Anger of the Gods in the side. But I think in this meta it's 6/1. I don't anticipate running it to so many humans that I need to have 1 of each with less graveyard powered decks running around. I think that it might be probably correct to switch to 1 Anger and 1 Sweltering Suns. Because in the matchups where Anger of the Gods is bad, top decking this card is really bad. Like with Forest, with me losing to having a Forest in play when it should have been a Mountain, oftentimes I am drawing Anger of the Gods and losing the game on the spot because it's not either a cycler that gives me another redraw or any other card. So the ceiling's high on this card, the floor is quite low, but it's kind of a necessity. It has to stay in the deck because against the right matchups, it is brutal and devastating. All right, well, the namesake, or half of the namesake of the deck, Through the Breach, I can't say enough about this card. I often wonder why people even still play Scape Shift or Titan Shift variants when this card exists and it does what Scape Shift does so much faster. It's another kind of, I guess the thing about this combo deck is that it is just that, a combo deck. Scape Shift plays more, I guess more like almost like a control deck. You use your land drops and your removal and your other spells to kind of guide the course of the game. If they get ahead, you have certain tools in your box that can handle, I guess, maybe even more situations. And when you draw Scape Shift, it is a 1-card combo once you have reached your critical mass, whereas Through the Breach is a 2-card combo, which makes it kind of a weak link to cards like Thoughtseize and the like, because if they take away Through the Breach, then you're potentially at least one mana away from casting one of your bigger creatures, and if they take the creature itself, then this card is dead all on its own. It doesn't do anything unless you literally have a win con card in your hand or a way to get one at instant speed. But I think that what it loses in raw power or singleton power, it gains in speed. This deck goes off between turn 3 and 4 in 90% of games, and I think that just that speed, especially in this format, and that unpredictability just makes it that much more powerful. A lot of times people see Stomping Ground, Search for Tomorrow, and they think they're on Scapeshift. I have had a number of opponents who didn't know that I was on the Breach variant, tap out on their turn 3 or even their turn 2 leading into my turn 3, thinking that they had time, that I was going to just play maybe another Farseek or a Sakura Tribe Elder or any number of other cards and just continue to ramp towards Scapeshift. And when I see that the coast is clear, through the Breach, Primeval Titan, 18 damage at you. It is a brutally fast card, and I think it is just a strictly better build than the Titan Shift variant. Primeval Titan, obviously, I mean, this card needs no introduction. If you're watching this video, you understand that Primeval Titan and the engine for getting Valakuts and Mountains out are the primary win condition of the deck. You cast through the Breach, you breach in Primeval Titan. Often at this point, you have 4 or 5 lands if you're hard casting through the Breach with no Simian Spirit Guides. If you're 4 lands or mountains, then Primeval Titan's first trigger gets 2 Valakuts. You go to combat, you swing with Primeval Titan, you get 2 mountains that deals 12 damage all by itself, and then of course Primeval Titan's trample power will be dealing 6 to your opponent, and there are very few creatures that can block that to success. So that's what the deck is looking to do 99% of the time, or I'll say 90% of the time. So you're looking to through the Breach and Primeval Titan, get Valakuts, get lands, go attacking, even if they exile or kill Primeval Titan or stop him or whatever. Often through the Breach of Primeval Titan is enough to get your Valakut engine online, so that every land drop after that, every ramp spell, and every Summoner's Pact is dealing 3 damage, or at least 3, depending on how many Valakuts you have. And after that, your inevitability kind of skyrockets. So the slower the game goes, kind of the better for you. We can win out of nowhere with Through the Breach and Simian Spirit Guide. And even if we have to play all the way to turn 6 and cast Primeval Titan the hard way, that often is a back-breaking enough move to overcome even the most hopeless looking of board states. I have definitely had my share of being super close to throwing in the towel, only to top deck Primeval Titan and not winning on the spot, but then casting it, getting Valakuts and Mountains, and beginning to be able to control the board, which is super important, especially as blue-white decks make a resurgence. And that's the name of the game. Even if you don't win on the spot, being able to throw multiple bolts each turn is often more than enough to just skyrocket your inevitability, control the board, and eventually just win. Woodfall Primus, it's a little bit of a spicy include, or some people think of it as spicy. I don't. I think it's perfectly necessary. Ever since I've been running Breach, I've been running Woodfall Primus right next to it. It steals games against Tron or decks where lands are important, or mana screwed opponents. It is there to take care of weird, I call them, quote unquote weird, permanents that might not be necessarily staples in the format in main board decks, but are nonetheless able to prevent you from winning if they resolve. Think main deck Ensnaring Bridge, main deck Ruined Halo, naming Valakut, Blood Moon, of course, and other weird enchantments. The Tension Sphere in the main deck, holding up a Titan or some other. Well, really only Primeval Titan is the only card that would get sucked under the Tension Sphere in the blue-white control matchup. But Woodfall Primus often is a nasty surprise that people who think that Ruined Halo and an Ensnaring Bridge are going to stop us from doing anything. That's often a surprise that kind of knocks them back, especially if they have a fragile board state around protection, artifacts, or enchantments, or lands like that. Has stolen so many games from me. I don't think I'll ever cut Woodfall Primus from the main. It's just too useful. And 99% of the time, even if the lands don't matter, Like if they've got a great deal of lands and I just threw the Breach and Woodfall Primus and taking 2 lands doesn't really hurt them, having a 6/6 attack and then leaving behind a big fat 5/5 will definitely slow their roll, especially post Hogak. Alright, so onto the sideboard. Now, as I said before, this is definitely a work in progress. I feel like I change my sideboard just about once a week as I think of new cards, as new cards come out or the spotlight is turned on certain cards. This changes, but I think that going forward into this kind of new format, this mysterious new format, this is a pretty good mix. I don't want to get got. I know a number of players have been kind of hastily deboarding Graveyard Hate out of their sideboards. A lot less Grafdigger's Cages, Leylines of the Void, Relics of Progenitus in sideboards, and I guess even in main boards. And speaking of Relic of Progenitus and Surgical Extraction, people have been taking those out. I think that that is a bad move. Graveyard decks are still powerful, and I think you need only look to Dredge for examples of how formidable graveyard decks can still be. So I have reduced my number of Graveyard Hate to 2 cards, Grafdigger's Cage and Relic of Progenitus. That's kind of exclusively it. And so far, that's all I've needed. In testing on Magic Online, obviously I don't think the format is settled yet. Everyone's just testing out their shiny new Stoneforge Mystics. But so far, this combination has served me well in terms of Graveyard Hate. For repetitive casting decks, I use Damping Sphere. It's kind of, it's great that it works against Tron and Amulet Titan and Storm and Aria of Flame, I guess Burn, I don't even know, mono red aggro, decks that might still run Phoenix, you know, stuff like that. Damping Sphere is often a nail in the coffin for decks like that. It just handles so many decks all at once. I don't think I'll ever have less than 2 in my sideboard. There have always been 2 just right there waiting for me. And every time I bring it in and play it in a relevant matchup, it has always done good work for me. Obstinate Baloth is really, it's kind of self-explanatory. Jund, 8-rack, burn, blue-white control, basically stuff where big, meaty body that gains you life might be a problem for an opponent. In terms of the control matchups where counter magic is an issue, you just bring in more and more things for them to counter and just make them always have that counter spell. Has done great work for me. It used to be 3. I cut 1 to try some other things. We are already so favored against decks like Jund, decks like Burn, mono red aggro, and blue white control that I found 3 to be a little much. Between Summoner's Pact and an Obstinate Baloth, 2 is often more than I need to either overwhelm the opponent and burn out their counter magic or just get out of reach of their burn spells. Awesome card. I have played some versions of this sideboard in which I have no Baloths in my sideboard, but I think that 2 is a pretty safe number from moving forward. We'll see how that goes. Force of Vigor is kind of new. I used to, I cut a Reclamation Sage so that I could have 2 of them in there. And so far so good. I've played against Bogles once or twice. It definitely did work against that deck, so much work. In fact, losing the utility of being able to call my Reclamation Sage with a Summoner's Pact has definitely hurt. And there are some corner cases where I have been in trouble and I think maybe even lost games. I don't remember any instances in particular, but I know that there are some times when I wanted to Summoner's Pact afterboard and Reclamation Sage was not there, and I was hurt for that. But being, I think, the only force that doesn't -1 you, you lose 2 cards, they lose 2 permanents, so you're not down on cards. I think that it's just too valuable a card, and it's just gotten me out of so many bad situations, especially against decks like Urza, Bogles, Prison, you name it. I think that 2 is the right number for now. We'll see how that goes moving forward. Abrade, kind of self-explanatory, another kind of gets humans. They're often not expect, or even if they are expecting Abrade, they have to watch out before Lightning Bolt and Anger of the Gods and other cards that they might be trying to stop me from, that they can't kind of, it's just another base for them to cover that stretches them a little thinner, that much thinner. And it's also a bit of artifact hate, which can't hurt, especially in a meta where all these Arkham's Astrolabes are being thrown left and right. Sweltering Suns I already explained. Beast Within, another kind of catch-all sort of like Woodfall Primus in the main. Anytime I'm expecting something weird or even a mirror matchup, I would say most of the time, like north of 75% of the time when I'm casting Beast Within, I'm blowing up a land of an opponent that is mana screwed. I'm taking away Tron. I'm blowing up a opposing Valakut, or just trying to trip them up in the middle of their combo. It has won me a game against a Scape Shifter who had exactly critical mass, sacked all their lands, played exactly enough to 18 me, and then I Beast Within their one mountain and they did nothing. So it's just a great catch-all card. You only really need one because giving them the body is also relevant, and you know, this often does the trick on its own. Tireless Tracker, this used to be 2, but again I cut 1 for Force of Vigor. Instead of 2 Force of Vigors, it used to be another Tireless Tracker and a Reclamation Sage. But I still left 1 Tireless Tracker in. Great against control, great against Jund, great against grindy matchups where card advantage matters and you're not necessarily winning all of a sudden. It's great against 8-rack. Just a phenomenal all-around card. I would really like to have 2 in here, but I think that this sideboard is balanced out enough. I might cut an Engineered Explosive, but I think this sideboard is balanced out enough that I don't need an additional Tireless Tracker. But it is, I mean, even Jim Davis calls it the best printed card in Modern, and a part of me has to agree. This card has just single-handedly got me out of so many bad spots. It doesn't often win the game on its own. I don't know that I've ever dealt a lethal blow with Tireless Tracker. It doesn't have trample. It's when you think about it, it's rather easy to get rid of on its own, but the card advantage it generates, it's often a 2-for-1 all by itself. Even if it only lives a turn, it's often a 2-for-1, and it's just an all-around super useful card. Rurik Thar's for Storm, Control, Urza, mono red aggro. Sometimes it's a little slow for that, but basically anything where they're creature light and spell heavy, this card has locked out so many opponents, locked them straight out. When I play paper games of Magic, and anytime I bring this in, I haven't had that many opportunities to bring it in online, but in paper Magic I often resolve this in a relevant matchup and it's just game over. Even if they're at full life, proceeding from there is often just too difficult for them, especially if they don't have, if the first spell they have is not removal for this card. It is often between Valakuts, Lightning Bolts, and other damaging spells a hard lock. Grafdigger's Cage and Relic for graveyards, and Engineered Explosives. This is kind of an experimental include. I used to have 1, I went up to 2. I had some bad games against Bogles with life gain, and with Urza, all of their 0 and 1-drop artifacts. I think that 2 in the side is probably a better number. I'm trying it out. That might definitely change, but when I have resolved Engineered Explosives in a relevant matchup, it has often bought me just the exact amount of time I needed to get to my 4 mountains and through the breach with Simian Spirit Guide. So it buys time. There is no way to make any other color of mana besides red or green in this deck, so it's only ever worth 0, 1, or 2, unless an opponent has got something weird going on, like an Urborg or something like that, or a Spreading Seas or some other way to give you a 3rd color mana somehow. But being able to control 0-drop, 1-drop, or 2-drop permanents is exceedingly useful, especially against more aggressive matchups where they're also, with their army of 1-drops and 2-drops, they're winning on between turn 3 and 4, which is kind of prime time for you. So I'm up to 2 now. We'll see how that goes. Subject to change, obviously. I think that's kind of a flex slot, but that's the deck. As I said, I'm doing quite well. It's doing quite well by me online, and I would like to just share more of those results with all of you. Thank you for watching, and my next video will be me starting a league. Thanks for watching this deck tech, and I look forward to making many videos with this deck. All right.